Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second session of NNClimate21. I hope those of you that were with us for the first session found it to be interesting and useful. This second session is going to be looking at sustainable travel and the way forward, and we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers who are doing work in Northamptonshire on sustainable travel. A quick reminder, as we go along, we'd be really keen for questions to be submitted, and that can be done by the email address nnclimate21@northants.gov.uk. So to get started with this session, we're going to move to our first speaker, which is Matthew Pencharz, who is from Voy and is head of policy there. And he's going to be talking to us about micromobility and delivering zero emissions transport. So over to you, Matthew.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Harriet. And very good to be here. Well, not here physically, here in the London office, to talk to you about Voy and our service in Northamptonshire and how we're delivering sustainable mobility. We can have to put up the slides, please. Great, thanks. So go on to the next one, please. Okay, so we are Voy Technology. We are a Swedish company, only 3.5 years old, and yet we're operating across multiple markets in Europe, in the UK and on the continent. And essentially, we are creating cities made for living. So go to the next slide, please. And as I said, it's only 3.5 years old, but in that time, really shown the latent demand there is for micromobility. Micromobility are using e-scooters and e-bikes, both of which are operating in Northamptonshire. So in that, just those 3.5 years, we've got 6 million users, and we're operating in 70 cities across 11 countries. 1,000 employees and a huge reduction in our carbon emissions that we have achieved in what is quite a young company. And what I really like to show to people is the bottom left, the big fat zero road launches. So what Voy really likes to do is work with our cities, with our local authorities, with our public sector partners to deliver services that also fulfill the policy goals and sustainability goals of our host cities and towns and local authorities. What we don't like to do, like perhaps some of our North American competitors and colleagues, is sort of land scooters as if out of space on street corners without working with the town cities. This is not the way we like to operate, and we're very pleased to be working with North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire since we arrived around 15 months ago. So go on to the next slide, please. And this is our presence here in England and the UK. We are the biggest operator. We have around 50% of the market that has opened up since the government, under emergency COVID regulations, are trialling e-scooter, shared e-scooter operations across England. So we started, Northamptonshire was the first place started in September last year. And in that period, we have had, not all in Northamptonshire, I hate to add, but some 7 million trips. We've got 11,000 e-scooters in operation. We have it's not equal, but a good portion of women as our users, some 36%, and we're working very hard on how we can seek to improve that. What's interesting is to compare that to cycling, which is, I'm afraid to say, a great deal more unequal than that. But also, when looking very much on the sustainability, we have reduced, mitigated, or avoided a huge number of individual car trips in particular. So of our 7 million trips, some 2.75 are car trips have been avoided because people have chosen to use a Voy, a bike, or an e-bike or an e-scooter, rather than a car or taxi. So we go on to the next slide, please. And then how do we really work on this sort of decarbonisation journey? What's our impact, our environmental impact strategy. So there's two obvious pillars to that. The first one is to make sure that our own house is in order, that we're delivering climate neutral rides. And there's a few steps through that, which I'll walk through in a minute, around measuring our emissions. You can't manage what you can't measure, and then seeking to reduce those emissions. And there's a variety of steps in that, extending the vehicle lifespan, optimize zero emission operations, and then ensuring the embedded carbon in those vehicles is absolutely minimized by having circular economy principles, ensuring everything can be reused or recycled, and a minimal amount goes through to the waste stream, and then offset the final emissions. And we've been registered net zero since January 2020, so almost 2 years now. And the other, obviously, is fostering car replacement. How can we really drive that modal shift? How do we properly integrate as a key part of the transport infrastructure of the towns, cities in which we're working? Particularly multimodal, many of our users come off trains or trams on the continent and then onto our service as part of that last mile trip that they're making. And of course, a lot of that is working with local communities, ensuring that we're inclusive, that we have a pricing structure that works, that's inclusive, and can really drive opportunities for people to go socialise or go perhaps access jobs, a place to work, which they couldn't do before. Of course, very important to be safe and efficient and sustainable. And overall, that could bring together to decarbonise urban mobility. Go on to the next one, please. So, as I said on the previous slide, 3 steps to how we can be certified net zero. The first one really is to measure our emissions. What emissions are voice operations and void manufacture and end of life responsible for? And we do a piece of work there around a life cycle assessment that we got EY, the consultancy, to really do a deep dive on last year. And then there's obviously reducing emissions. How can we really squeeze those out? How can we maximize carbon efficiency in our manufacture operations and end of life processes? And that forms our climate action plan. And then the last part is offsetting whatever remaining emissions we have in order to ensure that we can be certified as a net zero operator. Let's go on to the next one, please. So here we are about how we really measure those emissions. How can we ensure that not just our scope 1 emissions are what we actually use when we're operating, but all scope 1, 2, and 3 are really properly measured and publicly understood. And that gives us then an understanding of how we can increase efficiency and really squeeze the carbon value out of our entire supply chain. So clearly there's production of the vehicles in the first place, there's the transport of those vehicles and their batteries into our market, so into Europe. Then there's obviously the use and redistribution. Can I try and speak up? Okay, I'll try and speak up. And then there's obviously the maintenance and, very importantly, the end of life for the scooters. So we go on to the next slide, please. And here's our life cycle assessment. So it's interesting to note, in fact, how much is really dependent on the production of these vehicles. So there's a lot of work there to ensure that their lifespan is as long as we could possibly have, how they can be, all the parts can be reused and recycled to really reduce the embedded carbon that there is in those vehicles. And then there's the transportation, the use distribution, the maintenance, and the end of life. So clearly that is where our work really has to be focused on in order to reduce hugely the carbon impact, the environmental impact of the manufacture, operation, and the end of life. If we go on to the next slide, we can see here about how we're really seeking to reduce our impact. So the first one is really maximizing the scooter lifespan, ensuring those vehicles are long lasting. So you may have read in the press about how on shared e-scooters, the lifespans are very short. Now, that is true when this industry started up 3 years ago. The industry now has really improved and it's in order to reduce our own impacts, maximize the length of those vehicles. So our ones, for example, will last 5 years. And our intention is that once we want to be operating on our roads through our operations for a while, we will sell those into the secondary market. But also we really need to find sources for all second life battery applications, and in fact we're hoping to engage in Northamptonshire companies around that as well. And the other one is our own zero emission operations, ensuring that our vehicles are zero emission, that we use to redistribute. So we use sort of e-cargo bikes and then e-vans, and then similarly the power in our warehouses is from renewable sources. So go on to the next slide, please. So here we are about maximising the scooter lifespan, sorry. So you saw earlier how arguably the first one has a lifespan of around 1 year. Now you've gone to 2 years for V1 and 2, and the V3 and 4, which are the scooters that are operational in Northamptonshire, we've got up to 5 years now. These are robust pieces of kit. They aren't going to fall to pieces very quickly. They aren't the sort of, I suppose, some of the hacks that were put in the very first generation of shared e-scooter mobility, and are really ensuring they are their lifespan is really maximized. And a very important feature is the swappable battery, which really helps to reduce the carbon emissions of our operations. Go on to the next slide, please. And this is moving on to the zero carbon emissions. So we use battery cargo bikes for battery swapping. So you may have seen in the towns across Northamptonshire these bikes cycling around to deliver them. It looks a bit like selling ice cream. It's not. What they're doing is taking out depleted batteries and replacing them with fully juiced up batteries. The batteries are taken back to the warehouse to be recharged. And then we're also using electric vans for some of the redistribution of the scooters around to ensure they're at places of high demand and ready for usage. Go on to the next slide, please. And then overall, this is how we have forced down the life cycle carbon emissions of our operations over the last 2 years, over 75%. And this is by looking at all the steps that are involved. So achieving much greater lifespan of our vehicles, streamlining the reuse and recycling, electrification of the operation, so not using diesel or petrol vans in particular, ensuring there is second life for both the scooters and importantly the batteries, probably into stationary applications. And then it's remarkable how going to swappable batteries have really helped to improve both their operational efficiency, but also the carbon efficiency of our operations. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And we are now certified carbon neutral since the beginning of 2020. And last year, we were all at the COP conference in Glasgow, where our CEO, Frederick Helm, announced our intention by 2030, we intend to be climate positive. So that means by further squeezing every bit of carbon value out of our supply chain, coupled with the modal shift that our services are driving, we can say that we will be climate positive in that we reduce carbon emissions by more than the full supply chain, all scope 1, 2, and 3 of our emissions by 2030. So we'll become a climate positive business over the next 9 years, working with our supply chain and our cities to really maximize modal shift, which brings us on to I suppose pillar 2 of our climate plan. Go on the next slide, please. And this is what we're seeking to solve here in the UK, I suppose, the transport dilemma. So we've seen since the post-war period, 50s, 60s, 70s, a huge increase in individual car usage, while a reduction in more sustainable modes of transport. And the example here we use is tram systems across the UK. Could some more of it come back in the last 20 years, but we're at a very, very low base. And if you see about carbon emissions generally across England and the United Kingdom, we are doing fairly well across most verticals. So in the power sector, in particular, we've seen huge savings in carbon efficiency, and even in heating of homes through installation and more efficient boilers, and now switched to perhaps heat pumps and more sustainable and zero carbon forms of heat. We are really improving. However, transport continues to increase. There's been a shift more to SUVs, and the modal shift that can really help to drive down carbon emissions arising from transport has been fairly slow, and this is where micromobility can really help. Go on to the next slide, please. So we have been really working to get people out of their cars for those shorter journeys. And certainly here in the capital of London, a third of all car journeys are under 2 kilometres, and another third are between 2 and 5 kilometres. Now, that obviously isn't the same across the whole country, but a huge number of journeys are done in cars for what are very short places to, people trying to go to. Now, of course, I don't think anybody can fairly say that all journeys can be done through walking, cycling, and micromobility or sustainable modes, but a huge portion of them can be. And it's really where offering that seamless service, that frictionless service, that ease of operations, that affordability and safety can really help to give people alternatives, and especially if it's then integrated with other mobility service platforms such as Trainline or some of the train operating companies such as NNER. We can really have that safe, seamless operation, so people get off the train, get off the bus, and they go straight onto a micromobility mode and reduce the need for that individual car journey. And the modal shift figures here in England are absolutely astonishing. So I think largely because the public transport offer in England is not as good as on the continent. It's much higher in our English markets actually than on our continental ones. And our own users tell us that some 39% of our rides would otherwise have been taken by a car or a taxi rather than on a Voi. So it can show you that we're really helping to give that choice to the residents of Northamptonshire and our other markets, to how they could elsewhere otherwise get about rather than jumping in a car, adding to congestion and pollution. And as I said, the key drivers to that modal shift really is availability, convenience, affordability, and safety is how we're really going to see how we can drive forward that modal shift. Go on to the next slide, please. And again, to make it easy, this is a quick introduction to our app for those who've not used it. It's really straightforward. You download the app, you sign up, you put your payment details in and the rest of it. Regulations require that you upload a picture of a driving license to check on who you are and your age. That's be 18 plus for the scooters and 16 for the bicycles. And then you go up to one of our scooters or bicycles and you take a picture of the QR code on that, and essentially unlocked. And it's affordable service. It's £1 to unlock, and then just 20p per minute as you scooter around. And it really is as straightforward as that. And when you end your ride, you need to take a picture of your scooter safely parked to show to our back-end team that you've responsibly parked that scooter and ensured that it's not causing clutter or getting in the way of other road users. We go on to the next slide, please. And again, we use geofence technology to really optimize the use of the service to make sure it goes where it wants to go. There's certain no ride zones, for example, in partnership with the local council, for example, perhaps not in parks or in pedestrianised areas. And then the scooter will not operate also outside of the operating area itself. And then we can also have slow speed zones, perhaps where there's shared spaces for pedestrians to ensure the safety of both the user and of course other people around. And then we can have different parking models on where to safely park the scooters. So go on to the next slide, please. And we really see ourselves as an enabler of this 15-minute city. I think the pandemic has really made people perhaps rethink some of the working patterns. People probably aren't going to go to the office 5 days a week in the way they used to, perhaps more hybrid working, going to the office 1, 2, 3 days a week, but staying at home, working from home the other days, and spending perhaps more time in the local community. And the 15-minute city concept is really thinking about how most of the things we need when it comes to education, when it comes to social welfare, when it comes to education, and perhaps when it comes to working and shopping, is within a 15-minute city, so roaming range of where you live. And you can certainly see how e-scooters, micromobility or e-bikes can really enable that, how you've got a sustainable mode, not getting your car. You can travel with a 15-minute roaming range to do most of the things you want to do in your day-to-day life and really spend more time, more money within your local community, but also obviously reduce hugely your environmental impact and reduce those single occupancy car journeys in particular that cause so much congestion, but also some of the air pollution and carbon emissions in our towns and cities. So we go to the next slide, please? And here we've really sort of worked up some of the ideas about how we could really change the way our town cities work through micromobility by reducing, in particular, single occupancy car usage. So here's a street in Liverpool where we also operate. And then if you go on the next slide, we see a rendering of what it might look like in a kind of 15-minute city, reducing car usage world. Much more pleasant. You see shared spaces, safer for children to run and play in, and sort of a nicer environment. And you can have your cups of tea and coffee, perhaps in better weather than we have going into autumn. And we go on to the next slide, similar rendering for Marseille, similar idea here, where very car-centric, small amount of spaces for people to walk. Go on to the next slide. And a similar idea here, where this becomes a much more livable space with more green, more canopy cover, try and reduce the urban heat effect. Go on to the next one. And then Copenhagen, similar, another market we work in, where again you can see it's basically a car park. And we go on to the next one, and you can see it's a place far more fit for people to live and work and play in. And then on to the final slide. And that's thank you very much for this opportunity, and look forward to taking some of your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. That was really good to find out more about Voy, the scooters we've got locally as well, and to hear more about the detail with regard to their lifespan, which I think is something that's perhaps not always remembered when you're hopping on a scooter, that they do have a lifespan and they have a carbon footprint as well, and how you offset that and make sure that it's sustainable in every sense. So thank you for that. We're now going to move on to Cecil Gray from Liberty Charge, who is going to be talking to us about bringing e-mobility together. So over to you, Cecil.
Morning all, hope everyone's doing well. Matthew did a fantastic presentation, so thank you for that. And I think some of the themes that we've just seen with Voy, I think we'll speak through to a couple of the notes that are in the presentation going forward. So if you don't mind, please sharing that on the screen. Perfect. Next slide, please. Fantastic. So there's just a few points I want to bring forward in this agenda. Just a brief introduction to Liberty Charge, what we do and how we work. The e-mobility outlook. I think we've just spoken about what e-mobility is looking like in a lot of Europe, and I think it's worthwhile looking at individual markets as well. And I'll take you through that as part of this agenda. What we're doing to bring e-mobility together, and what we're doing in North and West Northamptonshire so far. We've got a really, really exciting, fun-packed deployment plan for bringing forward electric vehicle charge points and bringing e-mobility together in both councils. So if you could provide, please, the next slide. So looking at the challenge that we face at the moment in terms of electric vehicles, because essentially Liberty Charge wants to ensure that every person that wants to switch to an electric vehicle has the ability to do so, even if they don't have the ability to charge at home. So trying to bring essentially residential charging to you in the most easiest and efficient way. I think most people would like to be able to make the switch to an electric vehicle, but often the first thing that comes up is indeed, where do I charge? How do I charge? And how much is it going to cost me to charge going forward? So the biggest challenge is indeed the deployment of more public charge points. At the moment, there's a massive gap in the number of on-street residential charge points that are available, and we need to really grow that to in and around 300,000 publicly available charge points. That's a massive investment of around £7.1 billion that needs to be provided to really ensure that we have the sufficient chargers to make everyone comfortable to make the switch to electric vehicles. And given that the UK government has placed a deadline of 2030, some may say, you know, that's too far away. We need to bring that a bit closer to 2025. But actually what you'll see is that the trends are showing that there are a lot of us moving to electric vehicles and a lot of people crying out to really get charge points as close to home as possible. What we find is one of the major challenges to deploying on the street is there's quite a complicated process on the back end of things when we are going through the different legislations, etc. But, you know, working with places like Northamptonshire, West and North, we've managed to find a way through, and we are currently deploying in the area, but there is definitely a need to deploy more charge points to help us make the switch and reduce the vehicle emissions that we see from both petrol and diesel vehicles. Next slide, please. So what do we do at Liberty Charge? Well, actually, we work with local authorities to understand their needs of electric vehicle charge points and their other e-mobility needs. So it was just touched on a bit more with Matthew in the previous presentation, but looking at how do we bring those e-mobility sources together to create a more consistent, a more fluid transport strategy that links electric vehicles, whether it be micro-mobility or cars or car clubs, together with smart infrastructure as well. We provide all charging speeds. So generally what you'll find is in most locations on the motorway, if you've ever seen those really big chunky looking charge points, those are what are known as rapid charge points. And those are more in your destination locations. We are very much focused on providing that residential charge point. So anything between 7 to 22 kilowatts, meaning that you can charge most cars with around a 40 kilowatt battery in a couple of hours from 0 to 80%, which is where you want to be. And we do it all at zero cost to local authorities going forward, just to make sure that actually, you know, where there are strains, given the past year that we've had, that we're able to provide the service to residents and local authorities don't feel that strain and able to dedicate even more things and more time to the service. Can I have the next slide, please? And the next. So just providing the e-mobility outlook, and we'll touch on three really key pillars that we see in e-mobility, and one being the current market of electric vehicle charge point registrations. And this data has been provided by SMMT, and it looks at the way in which we are currently purchasing vehicles. If you looked at this perhaps 10 years ago, you would have seen diesel being very high on the agenda for people purchasing brand new vehicles. But what we've seen even in the past year during the pandemic, it's that people are already thinking ahead and making that switch to either a pure electric or a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So year to date, what we've seen is that diesel sales are down by at least 31%, some would say it's slightly higher. And indeed, people are making the switch to hybrid vehicles. And that may be because there's a bit of anxiety again in and around where you can charge and how to charge. And that's what we're trying to fix. What we want to do is get people not only out of their diesel and petrol cars into an electric car, but also have them thinking about other modes of transport as well. And we'll touch on that in perhaps the next slide. But as I said before, we are seeing a massive rise in battery electric vehicles, up by over 100%, which is absolutely massive in this market, meaning that people are more aware of the changes that need to be had to make more sustainable trips and reduce the emissions as they go on their daily journeys in their vehicles. You perhaps go on the next slide, please. So just touching on how e-mobility has changed in terms of bicycles as well. And again, this is touched on in the previous presentation, but what we've seen is that there's been a massive soar in the way people are actually utilizing their bicycles and the types of bicycles people are purchasing. And what we've seen is that during the pandemic, the number of electric bikes has soared significantly again. And actually, there are a number of European organizations that have predicted that electric bike sales will be at 17 million in 2030, and they'll be up each year as we go along. What that does mean is that actually it means that people are perhaps thinking about going on longer journeys with their bikes more than just popping to your local shop. But it also means that perhaps people that have struggled with using a bike in the past have now thought of switching to electric bike to help with that in the future. So it's a massive shift in the way people are using their bicycles. And what this does do is open up a really big opportunity when you start to join the dots together in terms of all the other e-mobility uses that are out there, and what can we do to bring everything together in a really harmonious way and link these modes going forward. If you could just go to the next slide, please. We've touched on this again. I'm not going to take up too much time on this, but at the moment, what we're seeing is in around 18,000 e-scooters in and around the country, operating in 51 towns and cities, and indeed operating in North and West Northamptonshire. But we are a long way behind the majority of Europe, who have really taken to this type of mobility and use it in their everyday lives to do shorter, quick journeys. And indeed, when you think of London, who is essentially epicenter for the number of scooters that are in the UK, they're indeed 36th place in Europe, which in itself says that we need to be doing better across the country to boost the number of scooters, bikes, and electric vehicle charge points to really help others make the shift to a different mode of transport going forward. Please, next slide. And next. So, bringing e-mobility together, what does that mean? What does an e-site look like? Well, in an ideal world, it looks very much something like this, and we saw a couple of shots earlier as to what it could possibly look like in the future, where you've got car club sites that have shared mobility, so that ability to not have to have car ownership, but still travel with an electric vehicle when you need to make those journeys, perhaps do the large shop on a monthly basis, and bringing together scooters and e-bikes in the same place. But in addition to that, bringing in wayfinding, Wi-Fi, and other smart city capabilities, such as air quality monitoring, and one of the most innovative things that Silence uses is key check-in points with smart capabilities on the side of cabinets. So this is what it would look like in an ideal world, and I think this isn't too far in the future going forward. And in fact, if you go to the next slide, we are actually bringing this to reality. So what we have been doing, including the deployment of some of the sites that we'll talk about in the next couple of minutes, is deploying electric vehicle charge points that have the ability to be built out to a smart e-mobility site, which provides a residential charge point dedicated for residential use, a bay for electric vehicle car clubs for people that perhaps don't need a car full time, and deploying smart cabinets, smart city cabinets. And the great thing about our Liberty Charge is that our sister company is Virgin Media O2. And so what that means is that we can quite easily provide those Wi-Fi, those free Wi-Fi capabilities if needed, and indeed those IoT services as well. So this is actually happening in reality. And the great thing about these sites is that we are able to include things like e-bike stands. So utilizing the existing energy connection that we'll be placing in for the charge points, we can also feed those e-bikes to charge their batteries and indeed ensure that we don't have an additional trip for moving the batteries to a depot and having them charged and then bringing them back. Everything can take place in one specific area. And in these types of spaces, we would want to ensure that, of course, residential immunities is protected, but also trying to put these in locations where if you are coming off a train, you could easily make the decision, for example, at a station to either take a scooter, take a bicycle, take a car club vehicle, or indeed if you've got your own vehicle parked there, you'll be able to drive home having received a full day's charge for your car. Next slide, please. So what's happening in Lancashire? And I think there's some really good information here in and around the demand for electric vehicle charge points and indeed some of these e-mobility sites. So we've worked with Loughborough University to look at a number of data sets to try and understand where indeed there's most need for electric vehicle charge points in these types of e-mobility sites. And what's been produced is this wonderful map with the darker areas showing us where indeed we need to deploy as quickly as possible, and the other ones perhaps later on down the line. This takes in a number of data sets, as I said, including those that already have off-street capabilities to charge at home. And from the data, what we can see is that actually there's a requirement of a minimum of 588 charge points required by 2023. And that's in and around 300 charging sites. And in these hubs, we could seek to place 4 charge point sockets and indeed charge at least 10 e-bikes or 10 e-scooters as well at each point. That's not going to be the case for all sites. Some sites will just be dedicated for residential charging, but certainly would like to bring as many of those e-mobility sites in key strategic locations as possible. You can see from the image on the bottom right-hand side what the charge point will look like. They're very sleek, quite slim charge points, and indeed your car can quite easily plug in and charge. It's a very, very simple process to use. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of delivery, what does that mean and how many charge points are coming to you? So we've consulted with over 2,000 residents so far in the rollout of electric vehicle charge points to date. And what we can announce today is that by the end of the year, there'll be around 48 sockets available for residents to charge their car, both in the north and the west, across the whole of Lancashire. and we're looking to deploy another 40 sockets in the north in the coming months as well. What we've seen here, what we see here is indeed a prepped site, a site that's ready to go on Upper Thrift Street, where we've got a really smart cabinet, and what you can see on the floor are NLL sockets. So that's where the charge point will be inserted and ready to go. There's plenty of information on our website as to when they will go live, and we'll be doing various press releases and information in and around how to use each charge point as and when they are installed. Slide, please. Now, what's really important is making sure that we build out that network and grow to that near enough 500, 600 socket number. And to do that, we need to know where indeed there is more demand in those areas. And as we bring forward and bring together those e-mobility solutions by providing the energy connection whilst we have the charge points there, we also want to engage with residents that perhaps want to get a charge point installed close to their home. There is quite a lengthy process for that to happen, but what we do have is the skills in-house to do the relevant safety checks, DNO checks, and working with the officers at both North and West Northamptonshire Council. We are able to grow the network quite significantly, but we need the local residents to come along and also tell us where you want charge points. So if you pop along to libertycharge.com/request a charge point, we will be able to pop in your postcode and pop in your location. And we will, as much as possible, try to install an electric vehicle charge point close to you. And if there is interest in having one of those e-mobility hubs that brings it all together, please to let us know. And we are indeed looking forward to launching the first batch of Liberty charge points towards the end of the year. Thank you very much. That's the presentation.
Thank you, Cecil. Again, it was good to hear more of the detail about projects that are going on in Northamptonshire. And it was useful that you highlighted at the end how local people can request where they would like to see charge points. And we'd certainly encourage people to do that. As you say, there's a gap between the infrastructure that we need and the infrastructure that we have. And so it's really important that we're building on that. And certainly it's good to hear that we are in Northamptonshire with those additional points. So the 48 across Northamptonshire and the ones locally as well. So thank you for your presentation. Now I'm going to hand over to Alison Holland from Brightwayz, who's going to talk to us about getting active with our travel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to join you. Thank you very much for inviting me along. I'm Alison Holland from Brightwayz, and I'll be talking about active travel and how to get active, act on active travel. So I think the slides will be up in a moment, but just for now, I'll say hello to everybody. It's really interesting hearing the earlier talks. I particularly like the idea of the e-site, lovely out on the road, you know, with people, lots of different hubs and I'd like to see mobility scooter charging on that as well. So I think we've got the wrong presentation up there. Actually, mine's a different one. That's for Lucy, which is next. So never mind. Anyway, yeah, that was really interesting, Cecil, about the e-bikes, and obviously Matthew talking about the Voy scooters. That really links in with what I'm going to be talking about as well, because partly what I'm talking about is the infrastructure and the need for really good scooter ways and cycle lanes and for all sorts of mobility. So yes, I'm looking forward to the questions discussion afterwards, hoping that public again send in lots of comments and questions. So this can be like really engaging and we can all come back with our ideas and suggestions and just expand on what we've talked about, but, you know, responding to what's really piqued people's interest. So Yeah, I think my presentation will hopefully be here in a moment, but I'll just carry on talking for now about e-bikes and Voy scooters before I head into the active travel side of things. So yeah, I mean, I think before I go on, I will actually explain the phrase active travel, because some people may not be aware of it. I work in the sector, so it's a very familiar phrase to me. But when I talk about active travel, we're talking about obviously walking and cycling, but also other forms of active mobility. So that could be even like skateboarding for journeys, or even mobility scooters, because although people are sitting in a mobility scooter getting around, it is still a more physical active mode of travel compared to driving by car everywhere. So yeah, so really active travel is something that's a lot broader than just walking and cycling. Hooray, got my presentation up. Thank you very much, tech people working hard in the background. So right, so let's act with active travel. I'll be talking about how we can enable more walking, wheeling, and I will explain what that is in a moment, cycling and scooting in Northamptonshire to benefit us all. And the benefit us all bit is really important, because it's not just for cyclists or walkers, it's actually everybody, and I'll be explaining that a bit more in a moment. So next slide, please. So first, a quick introduction to me and Brightwayz. I am the founder of Brightwayz social enterprise. We're based in Geddington, near Kettering in Northamptonshire. There's our office there. We were originally known as Bright Kids. We've worked with many schools and local school children over the years, and we decided to grow up a bit and become Brightwayz. So we're now encompassing all ages. And we were actually originally inspired by the Geddington walking bus, which I organised in 2003. You can see there's a picture of Theresa May joined us for one of our walks one day. So we've that went for a few years, and then that inspired us with Bright Kids and then Brightwayz. And our aim is to promote safe, active, sustainable, everyday travel for all. So although we love cycling for sport and cycling for like going on holiday, this is really about everyday journeys. This is what our focus is. So what we do is we support councils, schools, businesses and other organisations such as charities to help deliver active travel initiatives and also road safety campaigns. And we do this through our products and information, which we sell UK wide, and locally our projects and consultancy services, which is just in the Northampton area. And we're very proud to be finalists in the environment category for the UK Social Enterprise Awards this year. We'll soon find out if we won, so that'd be nice too. Next slide, please. Right, so key points I'm going to cover. First of all, what's the issue? And then a bit of good news, so we'll like some good news. A look at the national view and what's happening politically along this, and then what's important about changing mindsets. We'll look at quite a few local examples of different kinds of organisations. Some of those you may recognise the names of. And the last one of those is actually looking at the work that we're doing in partnership with Northamptonshire Council on the Kettering Walk and Cycle Plan using the Commonplace platform. And then finally, a little bit of a, hopefully you'll have had a bit of information and inspiration to take some steps yourself. So next slide, please. Okay, so what's the issue? Transport, largest source of CO2 emissions in the UK and the fastest growing source. So it's a big impact on climate. Right, also road casualties. Oh, I can't see my numbers there because of the slides, unfortunately. I'm just going to change that. There we are, I can see it now. Okay, road casualties. In the UK, there are on average five or six deaths a day on our roads. And in Northamptonshire in 2019, there were 42 deaths. And this is obviously massive impact on, everybody. We all know somebody who's somehow been affected in this way. Air pollution is a big killer as well in the UK, nearly 40,000 deaths a year. And the British Heart Foundation projects and predicts that there will be 1,700 deaths in the next decade in Northamptonshire. And I say Northamptonshire because all the data is based on Northamptonshire details rather than Northants, but that's a pretty shocking figure, and that's talking about future. The congestion, this affects everybody. The cost of the British economy, the UK economy, is £6.9 billion a year. Next slide, please. So transport in Northamptonshire, these figures come from Department for Transport. In Northamptonshire, over a decade, the number of car miles driven, so that excludes the transport for lorries and things like that, just car miles driven per year increased by nearly 1 billion miles, and that's a 20% increase over a decade of the number of miles driven per year. So there's a big problem and it's growing. Next slide, please. Oh, good news. We all like some good news. So lockdown changed our habits. As we heard earlier, there's been a massive boost and increase in cycling, 46%. And there's also been a big investment from the government in walking, cycling and public transport. That's £5 billion in total. 2 billion of that is for walking and cycling. We've actually seen some of that already filter through to Kettering and Northamptonshire area, for example, with the cycle hub at the station in Kettering, and also initiatives such as Cycling UK in activities which have fed through to local community organisations, which I'll mention later. There's been a great growth in businesses becoming greener, more aware, more sustainable. So that's a real good thing. And we know that people want change. As organisations and individuals, we all have the power to make the change happen. And this is going to hopefully give you some ideas of how you can do that. Next slide, please. So more good news. There are lots and lots of benefits of active travel. It's not just about the climate. Obviously, health benefits. People who regularly cycle to work, for example, are 46% less likely to get cancer. Mental well-being. Cycling basically makes you happy and is really good for your mental health. It's also important for access and equality. For example, if there's a high dependency on people being car owners, those who cannot drive or do not want to drive are not able to access employment, training, health, leisure activities, things like our lovely country parks. And so it's really important that there are other options other than going by car everywhere. Businesses can benefit if staff, for example, cycle to work regularly. There is a 27% reduced absenteeism rate, and also environment. We've mentioned about the carbon, but there's also air quality, noise pollution. That's all reduced. The fewer people who drive and the more people who walk or cycle or travel in other active ways. And the economic benefits. There's a lot of savings for businesses if we don't have things like the congestion that's delaying us. And finally, of course, reducing the road casualties is another key benefit. Next slide, please. So the national view, we're lucky that the government is investing a lot of money in cycling and walking. And as I mentioned, we're starting to see some of that investment filtering through locally. They've also produced really good guidance, and their gear change is their vision for changing the way that we travel and reducing the car dependency that we have. There's a lot of measures listed there. I haven't really got time to go through all of those, but those are some of the things mentioned in the gear change document, and I would highly recommend you have a look and go online and have a look at that. But things like low traffic neighbourhoods, which reduces people cutting through the quiet neighbourhoods and making it safer, makes life better for everybody who lives there, and everybody can still access their houses as well. So next slide, please. Right, so there's a lot of work to be done though in changing mindsets, because some people think, well, many people will think, oh, well, a cyclist is, you know, a light clad, sort of healthy, fit, probably white male. Well, actually, we're not looking at doing this for them. We're looking at the people who are not cycling but would like to cycle. So that's why we're looking at a much wider range of people. You see the second little image, little icon there is somebody in a hand cycle. This is for someone with a disability. So we're looking at people with disabilities, different age groups, different income backgrounds, and making sure that this is for them. And when I mentioned walk, wheel, scoot, cycle and scoot, I mean wheel is as in people who use wheelchairs, mobility scooters, push chairs, prams, and all of those people need to be taken into account when we're looking at the changes needed. So the cartoon that you see with the cars, this illustrates the problem with building more roads. Many people think build more roads to cure congestion. Well, it won't. It's just like loosening your belt when you've eaten too much. It just fills again, and it will not solve anything. But we have to stop building more roads, and we have to start making it easier for people to choose the non-car methods of getting around, because that is what will cure congestion. And the Boris Johnson in gear change, he states this very clearly, that this is the way to go, and also that when you're putting schemes in, there will be backlash from some people, but it's really important that we listen to their objections and we understand them, and we have the education of the changes needed to make it acceptable for all. It will not ever be completely acceptable, but you have to be brave, because no action is not an option. People need to also realise that not all journeys need to change. We're not trying to say everybody must get rid of their car. Actually, cars are amazing and they serve their purpose. But what we're doing is trying to increase the number of journeys using other methods and make it easy for people to do that, to create benefits for everyone. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of what we've done. Some of the text has shifted a bit, I'm afraid, but this is an example of a school we worked with, Grange Primary, who achieved the Mode Shift Stars Silver Award, which is a national accreditation for sustainable travel. And this award is actually available for businesses, communities, schools, all sorts of organisations to go for. It's an excellent framework for improving your sustainable travel and active travel activities, and it really helps. And Grange Primary School actually saw an 11% increase in pupils walking to school after doing that. So we continue to work with schools, and schools can take part in this as well as businesses. Next slide, please. So we're also working with community organisations such as Wixley Park. And last weekend we had the Big Bike Revival, free cycle maintenance, funded by Cycling UK, one of the government initiatives, government-funded initiatives I mentioned earlier. And we are also doing an overall travel project with Wixley Park to promote safe, active, sustainable travel. And that's funded by the Office of the Police, Fire and Crime Commission. Next slide, please. Thank you. And businesses also, it's really important that businesses play their part, get on board. We're working with Rushden Lakes. We help them to run the Sustainable Travel Day in September and help them with their ongoing travel plan activities and things they do, like using the voice scooters. They have case studies with their staff talking about the benefits of using those. Next slide, please. And here's just a few ideas. I won't go through them all, but really this is just for businesses. It applies to many organisations actually, about how your staff travel to work. And I just want to emphasise that the travel plans that I mentioned earlier aren't just about active travel, they're about more wider sustainable travel. So they do include like e-cars and car sharing and using the buses and that. And it's important to have a very holistic approach in all of those, including things like policies such as recruit locally. You know, you can't always find staff locally, but have a preferred local recruitment policy. That's one thing you can do. And if you're interested in all of these things, these are the sorts of things that are covered through the Mode Shift Stars accreditation that I mentioned. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one is what North Northamptonshire are doing. We're working in partnership with the council and with WSP to develop what's called an LSWIP, or Kettering Local Cycling and Walking Infrastructure Plan. We call it a Kettering Walk and Cycle Plan for shortness. And this will enable more walking, wheeling, cycling and scooting in Kettering. So we're responsible for the community engagement with this. So I would first of all urge anyone local to Kettering to go to this website, ketteringtravel.commonplace.is, and you can pin your comments about what improvements are needed and how that would change the way you travel. We've been promoting this through various forums, like we have some young people coming to the event at Wicksteed. We'll be working with the schools, with lots of community organisations, including the business network where we were presenting the other day. It's really important that we get views from all sorts of people from all walks of life. So keep an eye on that website. There's a lot of news on there about what we're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, so hopefully the information I've given will inspire you, whether it's an individual or as an organisation or a business leader or community leader or a school, to take steps to do some of those things. And there's a lot of resources around. There's our own Brightwayz website, which has information, but also there's organisations such as Eco Futures Northants, which is a group set up by locals to promote various different eco issues and locally. So there's quite a lot going on really, and a lot of community-based stuff, such as community cycle rides on the last Sunday of every month. These things at the moment are also being published on the listed on the Brightwayz Facebook page. And if you go to the next slide now, please, you can see there's my contact details, including our website and the Brightwayz Facebook page, which is where we've got everything that is useful locally for active travel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison, for sharing that information with us. Another one where it's great to find out what's happening locally, and as you spoke about there's a whole host of work going on with the local cycling, walking and infrastructure plans. And it's really important that we get local people involved with those in the development of them and in encouraging them to switch to different modes of transport, walking and cycling being important parts of that. Congratulations on the award nomination. And it's obviously really good to have you involved and Brightwayz involved in the development of our cycling and walking locally to draw on that expertise. So thank you for that talk there. We're now going to hand over to Lucy Hawes from North Northamptonshire Council, who is going to be talking to us about the Greenway in North Northants.
Good afternoon. I'm Lucy Hawes. I'm the Community Partnerships Officer for North Northamptonshire. Good afternoon. I'm Lucy Hawes. I'm the Community Partnerships Officer looking after the Greenway in North Northamptonshire. Not sure if my slides come up yet. Thank you. If you could put on the next slide, please. So the Greenway was developed in the former East Northamptonshire before we became a unitary authority earlier this year. Its ambition was to provide links to and from the towns and villages in our area to our historical, leisure, employment and recreational sites with safe off-road walking and cycling corridors along the Nen Valley. But now we're part of North Northamptonshire. We are still working with that ambition and working with all the people that we have done in the past, but now it gives us an opportunity to work with many more partners and stakeholders, such as the River Nen Regional Park, Sustrans, Highways, the Environment Agency, Alison with Brightwayz, who we've just met, other local trusts and organisations such as Wicksteed's Park, and private landowners to help us realise the Greenway ambition across North Northants. Next slide, please. Greenways, they bring many benefits. The sections we have open, they follow part of the former railway line that used to run between Northampton and Peterborough. And they connect Thrapston to Rushden and Rushden Lakes. And they pass through Stanwick Lakes, Heigham Ferries, and we've got various spurs leading through to Earthlingborough, Woodford and Raunds. They allow the opportunity to improve lifestyles and improve healthy outcomes, reduce the amount of vehicles on the road network, reduce carbon emissions. For every kilometre cycled, CO2 emissions equates to about 21 grams, which is about 10 times less than going in the car. It connects our communities, and it also gives us safer routes to access leisure, tourism, recreation, work and education. It also allows us all year round accessible routes. However, I must mention that because it is along the Nen Valley, which is a floodplain, there are some sections which are prone to flooding during the winter. So we do have to shut sections, but obviously that is not in our control. But give or take, we do have all year round, all weather accessible routes. It also offers a great opportunity for community involvement. For the last 5 years, I've been lucky enough to lead the Outwater into History project, which has been funded by the National Heritage Lottery in partnership with Nenscape on a particular section of the Greenway between Rushden Lakes and Rushden. The project's called Outwater into History, and it was designed to encourage people that are visiting Rushden Lakes to visit Rushden Town Centre and vice versa, but do it for either walking or cycling. It's also to celebrate the heritage of the area. It used to be the branch line from Wellingborough through to Rushden and Heigham Ferries. So it was to celebrate the heritage, improve the wayfinding and increase its use. So we set up a partnership delivery group, and with the help of those, which encompassed local businesses and local partners, we established a Friends of the Greenway group, and we've got over 300 members now, and they get involved with regular litter picks, all sorts of community engagement projects that we've done, and it's all helped to bring this particular section back to life, give it a new lease of life and make it much more attractive to walk through. So much so that along this section there was a tunnel which unfortunately was quite neglected, didn't make the users feel very safe, and people didn't want to walk along there. So through a lot of work with the community, the local schools, we improved that tunnel, so much so that we won Northamptonshire's Best Exhibition in 2020. Sorry, 2021, this year. If you could put on the next slide, please. So that's just a quick picture of some of the engagement we were doing on the beginning of that section earlier this year. Next slide, please. And that is our plaque showing us our best exhibition. We won the award from the Northamptonshire Heritage Forum. Next slide, please. And that is the tunnel, one side of it, and it's been condensed so we can show it on the slide. But one side shows Rushden, the into history part of the project. So there on the R, you have a painting of the train that actually did. So the train did look like that along that route back in the beginning of the 1900s, and other things that represent Rushden's history, the boot and shoe, the various historical monuments in the town. And the other side was the Greenway lettered, which represents the Outwater part of the project. Next slide, please. That's a family litter picking back in September time when we had one of our last ones. And as you can see, there are some cyclists in the background, but that was quite early on in the morning. Next slide. That was when the tunnel was opened back in 2019. Next slide, please. This is part of the Outwater into history markings that we've had put on the surfaces between Rushden Lakes and Rushden Town Centre. So one side is out to water, so you follow that if you want to go into the Nen Valley, and the other side says into history to follow it into Rushden. Next slide, please. There you go, there's the other side, that's showing you the route into Rushden. Next slide. This is a section of the Greenway, which is on Wildlife Trust owned land, and this is between Higham Ferrys and Earthling Borough. Next slide. This is a section of the Greenway, which is between Woodford and Thrapston. This is not surfaced. It would be surfaced if we didn't have as many constraints, but this is work in progress here. Next slide, please. And that's a section of the Greenway close to Woodford towards Thrapston. You can see we have a different sort of surface in the more rural areas than we do in the urban areas. Next slide, please. So there are approximately 25 miles of the Greenway open, which were either owned by ourselves or partners of the Greenway Board. To open the various sections, the funding came from various sources, including the developer contributions, Safer Routes to School monies, and Sustrans, a cycling charity. The usage depends on the location. In Rushden or Higham Ferrys, or between Higham Ferrys and Earthling Borough, we can see up to about 40 users an hour, and they're using it for accessing work, education, leisure, and recreation. And in the rural areas, we're seeing about 20 people an hour, and they're mostly using it for exercise and leisure. We've got many proposed routes which we would like to develop across North Northamptonshire to continue extending the Greenway. Next slide, please. However, as with everything, there's plenty of challenges to extend the network. Where the land is privately owned, it's often difficult to sell the benefits. Perhaps after last year's lockdown, the time is right now to work with landowners to offer solutions. Last year, many people went out walking and they were not necessarily sticking to the rights of way. And it was particularly wet last year. Their crops got trampled as the users were trying to avoid the mud, so the pathway extended and extended. So it could be the right time to work with them to show how extending the Greenway and improving the green infrastructure could help alleviate some of the problems they've been facing. We could work with them to create routes to help channel the users on preferred routes on an all-weather surface, providing an all-year-round solution, which hopefully would bring mutual benefit. If we were able to do this and get some best practice examples, we may well be able to encourage other landowners to work with us. Also, where land is specially protected, we've got many challenges to overcome, and this has been especially highlighted in the work I've been doing, trying to establish a link between Rushden Lakes and Wellingborough. This is a very important section for us. It would link Rushden Lakes, which attracts so many visitors, and Rushden Lakes is connected to Rushden and the towns I've mentioned earlier through the Greenway. But between Rushden Lakes and Wellingborough, we have a scheduled ancient monument where Chester House Estate sits. We've got a specially protected area. We've got private landowners. We've got the River Nen. We've also got the A45 and the Midland Main Line Railway. So we've got quite a few things there to overcome. But we've just been lucky enough to secure some money from the Community Renewal Fund from the government to help us, to appoint a specialist consultant to design a detailed study and master plan for this, because this is an exceptionally difficult section. It's taken many years of work. So this is quite an event getting this money, and it's very promising that we should be able to get these studies and then be able to work with the landowners and all the interested parties in realising that section. Maintenance is also a challenge for us. Obviously, as a local authority, we don't have huge amounts of money. So we do have a smaller budget for the maintenance of what on the sections that we do own, but where we have to open new sections, we will need to gain agreement with the landowners, perhaps ask them if they could do the maintenance if we're putting in something that's going to last for quite a few years. And again, goes back to what I was saying about channeling the walkers and the cyclists on a all-weather surface, which is helping them and helping us with their safer routes. And again, funding's, as Alison said earlier, we are beginning to see it coming to trickle down, but still enough is never enough. So funding the sections is always a challenge, and getting the developer contributions in, especially where in the rural parts of North Northamptonshire, where we don't have a lot of development, especially in the very north of North Northamptonshire, where the links are needed as much as they are in the more urban to urban and urban to rural. Trying to find that money is quite difficult. And accommodating the different needs of all the user groups. Again, working with all the different user groups and trying to understand what journeys they need to make safely off the road to make sure they're accommodated is quite a task. Trying to engage with the community, as Alison was saying earlier, and Councillor Pentland, to encourage them to talk to us, to tell us where they want to go, is very valuable. Through the Friends of the Greenway group in the Outswater into History programme, we've got lots of good feedback. We understand what it is that where they want to access, which has helped us with the Rushton to Wellingborough section. But now, looking across North Northamptonshire, we need to continually engage with our population to find out where it is they'd like to go, so we can then plan and hope to roll out the Greenway to suit them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy, for that. Again, it's great to hear more about this. And I think with this morning's session, we've seen the various component parts of sustainable travel, from the charging points, electric scooters, cycling, and then more of the infrastructure that we need to roll this out as widely as possible through the Greenway. It's also good to hear about the ways the Greenway not only provides a mode of an area where you can travel through, but also the wraparound around that and the involvement through volunteering, for example, with litter picking. And it was great to be able to meet volunteers who are working hard to keep the Greenway looking its best earlier this year. It was really good to hear also about the opportunities for development. Of course, Lucy touched on perhaps the sticking points. And so finding ways to work around that will be really important. And I really hope that we can develop out the Greenway further so that it's accessible to as many people as possible. I know I certainly really enjoy using the Greenway regularly for walking and cycling to different places. So thank you, Lucy. Now going to head into the Q&A, and this is the part where I'll hand over to George Cllr from the council to take us through that, and hopefully we've got lots of questions in over the course of this session.
Thanks, Councillor Pentland. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name's George Cllr. I'm Executive Director for Place and Economy here at Northamptonshire Council. We've been monitoring the live chat on YouTube, so thank you for those that have been posting into there. And we've also been receiving questions through the dedicated email address. So what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes is draw on those questions to put them to our four panelists that we've got with us this afternoon: Matthew, Cecil, Alison and Lucy. So quite a bit around Voi, quite a few questions around Voi. So this first one is to yourself, Matthew. This is from a question from a local councillor in Kettering. So really positive feedback and the impact that Voi have made, and e-bikes very welcome into Northamptonshire, and very much about reducing carbon footprint and eliminating worry, for example, of where to park. But the key question is around that wider educational piece, both for those small number of users that perhaps aren't using them appropriately, and how do we combat that, such as riding on pavements, for example, but also I suppose the wider general knowledge of e-scooters, particularly if they're likely to be here to stay, about the wider population and how and what they understand from e-scooters and the sort of do's and don'ts.
Yes, I think I'll start with the second question first. So I think it's not completely surprising that lots of people are a bit confused when it comes to e-scooters, because clearly there are lots of illegal private e-scooters operating around. So just for background, in case people aren't aware, the only e-scooters that are legal on public land, so roads essentially, are part of the trials. So in Northamptonshire, it's the ones operated by Voi. If you go to other areas of the country, it might be Voi, it might be somebody else, a different operator, one of our competitors. But all the privately held e-scooters should only be used on private land with the permission of the landowner. And clearly that isn't the case. And I think in all fairness, that isn't clear to lots of people, including the owners of these private e-scooters or to members of the public. So you often see the two confused or conflated in people's minds, I think, because the private ones are unregulated, they aren't speed controlled, they're not geo-fenced, so they can go wherever they want, as opposed to the Voi ones, which are controlled. I think it's clear that the direction of travel is almost certainly legalization. There is an element of horse and stable door with all of this, I'm afraid to say. So I think the government is seeking a way to seek to regulate both the shared ones, which we operate, but also the private ones. But clearly there needs to be a level playing field, and there needs to be some kind of a maintenance regime. Our ones are very well maintained. The private ones obviously aren't, and sorry, that's unfair. They may not be maintained or properly by their users, and clearly there needs to be something about speed controls and maybe even where they can operate. So it's not fair that they should be zipping around a park, for example, and obviously endangering or at least frightening people who want to go for a bit more peace and quiet. When it comes to our own operations, we're pretty robust. In fact, we're very robust when it comes to irresponsible usage. People need to take photographs, I think, as I said, at the end of their rides to show that they have parked responsibly. But similarly, if people see them, if they're witnessed by either our ambassadors or by members of the public through our channels, Report a Voi, if they've been found to be twin riding or riding off the pavement, or just sort of certainly under the influence of drink or drugs, they get what we call a strike, which means that they have their account suspended for an amount of time. So the first strike is a week, second strike is a month, and the third strike is your account's deleted and you won't be able to ride again on a Voi. And in fairness, the number of second strikes are really very small. So we give out one strike and people do seem to learn, and their behaviours do improve. And incidentally, if you're caught drink or drug scooting, it is officially a motor vehicle, and the police can get involved, and we always support them on that. And they get striked out immediately. That's like 3 strikes in one for those kinds of behaviours. And we have seen a marked reduction in complaints and poor riding. I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect, because clearly it isn't, but it's a great deal better. The novelty value's worn off, and we've seen far more responsible riding than perhaps we saw when it first launched.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I think it shouldn't detract from the amount of very responsible users that are out there as well, using e-scooters and e-bikes on a daily basis across Northamptonshire. But I think that educational piece is key, isn't it? I think it's going to need to be a continuing one, I think, over the coming months and indeed years, no doubt. Okay.
And I should say, George, we do encourage all our users to wear helmets, and we have a Ride Like a Boiler sort of online training course, which we did together with Drive Tech, and it's had hundreds of thousands of views. So you're right, education is also an important part of all of this.
Great, thank you. Cecil, I'm going to turn to you next, if I may. Again, a lot of interest in your presentation, a lot of positivity again coming through, but a few questions coming from what you're presenting, particularly on the locations. Again, lots of positive feedback of the amount that's being rolled out in Northamptonshire, the additional 40 that you were referencing. But a couple of questions coming in of a similar theme from residents in Kettering, local councillors as well, about one of the images showed the charge point on the road. And the question was whether any in Northamptonshire were planned to be based on the road as opposed to on the footpath, which I think was one of your later ones. The concern being that obviously it reduces the width of the footpath for people with mobility issues. So I think there's that question about what's that proportion, and are we factoring in those people that might have mobility issues when we're placing them on the road? The second question is the electricity that is going to supply the EV points, is that going to come from renewable sources yet? So two questions there for you, Cecil.
Absolutely, and the first question is really important. Understanding the urban environment is really key for us at Liberty Charge, and indeed the officers that we've been working with at the council. Every site is taken for a rigorous test, so we try to understand what the residential immunity issues may be, what circulation around our charge points will be, and indeed security around each charge point is really important. So what we do is we look for a minimum standard at each of our sites, generally in and around 1.2 meters and above once the charge point has been installed, to ensure that safe circulation if it's installed on a pavement. We have looked at future installs that will perhaps be mounted in the carriageway. It is very much on a case-by-case basis, particularly when there isn't quite enough space on the footway. Then the next alternative is to put it in the carriageway, but that comes with a number of other challenges as well. Of course, in terms of making sure that is protected, making sure that it's visible for not just vehicle cars, but also for cyclists as well. And as pedestrians cross the street, making sure that they can be seen. So ensuring that there's no obstruction there as well. So there are a number of different factors in and around placing and siting a charge point, and absolutely circulation in and around them is a key focus for us. And it sits very high on not only our agenda, but the officers that we work with and the councils that we work with as well. To your second question, in and around renewable energy, that is absolutely the case, that our charge points are supported by 100% renewable energy. It is in case that the fact that, you know, we wouldn't want to use dirty energy to then fuel a beautiful electric car. That would be almost defeating the object, and that's what sets us apart from other providers that are perhaps from the oil and fossil fuel industry that are moving into this space, is that we do want to provide that renewable energy. We come from a place of telecommunications. Our background is with telecommunications, and the first thing we want to do is put sustainability first, as and when we look at a site and when we look to deploy sites going forward. We also do some really interesting, we'd also plant a tree for a charge point, so that's placed in the ground as well to help it go on set. So, you know, we are really thinking in and around sustainability as we deploy.
Great, thanks Cecil, and yeah, great to hear that you're planting trees as well as part of the offsetting. And again, we'll hear more about that in our third session about how we're improving the environment as part of our wider contribution towards the climate. So a couple of questions now, which I'll pose to Alison and Lucy. Again, a lot of positivity in the live chat about what you're both doing. So lots of people giving and wanting some of that activity to be in their areas. So some comments about, can we have more of this in Corby, for example? So yeah, lots lots of positivity. A couple of questions. One was, how can we make better use of some of the old railway tracks? So this came from a local councillor in Corby, that could be better utilised. So that's the sort of first question. And the second one was around our blue corridors, which, so, you know, our canals, could we make better use of these as a form of sustainable transport, or is it just not cost effective to incorporate those into our wider plans? So that's probably a combination of Lucy and Alison. So I'll maybe let you both answer both questions, and I'll start with you, Alison, first.
I think brilliant ideas, the railways and the waterways. And to be honest, it's not really my speciality area. I'm more about the sort of everyday journeys to and from work. And I don't really know enough about the waterways, but there's definitely, I'm sure, potential there. I think Lucy will be able to answer a bit better on that. But yeah, I mean, we used our waterways in the past a lot. So why not in the future? Definitely. So I'll hand over to Lucy though, because I don't think I know enough to say any more.
Thanks, Alison. Well, I'll try. So with the railway lines, it all depends who owns them. With the Greenway, the sections that we have opened, it was either ourselves as East Northants previously, or one of the partners on the Greenway board. If they owned it and they shared the ambition, then they would allow us to roll out the Greenway on it. So it was quite simple then. We could open it up. One of the reasons that the Greenway sort of stops at Thrapston currently is the old railway line is still there on its way to Peterborough, but it's under private land ownership. It goes through people's back gardens, you name it. So the likelihood of opening it going along that corridor is highly unlikely. So we have to look at alternatives. But where it belongs to one of our partners or anybody that's interested in getting involved in the Greenway, then please, we need to speak to them. We want to hear from them, and we want to help open it up and make as much use of it as possible. With regards to waterways, blue infrastructure, there is some work going on about trying to open up, investigate the possibilities of a water taxi between Wellingborough, Rushden Lakes, Stanwick Lake. So that's a piece of work that is being explored, and Riverend Regional Park are working closely on that. And I know that Catherine's been on this conference today, so she may be able to answer, or alternatively, if you give me some more details, I can go and find out more information for you. But yes, we definitely want to be able to use those waterways as much as we possibly can. And I work closely with Dr. Corinne Muir, who's looking after the Riverwayz partnership, and she's looking at ways of following the Riverwayz from Corby to Kettering to Wellingborough to create a green corridor down there. And she has a delivery group that helps her with that, and there's a variety of interests that support her with that. So blue infrastructure's high up on the agenda as much as green infrastructure is, and we would like to pursue it and get your ideas, if you could pass them to us, please.
Great, you heard it here first. Any of you watching either live or later, do please get in touch with ourselves here at North Northamptonshire Council. We'd love to hear from you on that particular topic. One last question to you, Alison. Active travel, how well known is it, do you think, amongst the business community in North Northants? I know you mentioned that you were at a recent event, but how are businesses embracing that, and what more could be done?
We've certainly seen a lot more interest over the last year or so, and more inquiries from businesses. There's so much more potential for businesses to be getting involved and including it in their sort of wider sustainability plans. It's not just businesses, but organisations like, for example, Kettering General Hospital. We've just started working with them on helping them to implement their travel plan. And lots of NHS organisations are being really pushed to the sustainability, and they're really going for it. Really, there's so much that businesses can do, whether you're one-man band or whether you're a multinational. And the STARS framework that I mentioned earlier, the ModeShift STARS framework, provides a really, really good way of businesses being able to measure what they do by doing their audits of what they're doing, looking at what they could do, understanding staff travel habits to and from work. I won't say too much because I could talk all day about this, but it's really worth people having a look. And if anyone is interested in finding out more, we did actually do a recent, I did a recent webinar on the ecofutures.northants.org.uk group and website, which was specifically about what businesses can do to reduce their transport impact and save money. So please have a look at that if you are a business and you're interested in that. There's so many benefits for businesses who do implement measures. Now, one key thing I really want to mention is travel plans. They're something that lots of businesses will be familiar with, especially if they're looking for getting planning consent. And they have to, often businesses need to submit travel plans, sustainable travel plans, as part of their sustainability and planning application. Very often those are written and then they are put on the shelf, and maybe some of the initial infrastructure measures are put in place. But what is really, really important with those is that they're taken off the shelf and they become a living document, which is regularly updated, communicated. And there's no point. It's like, you know, if you write a shopping list and you're going shopping and you leave it on the side, you get to the shops, you don't know what to buy, you come home and you haven't got anything for your tea. You know, you need to actually take action on those things. And that's what we've been doing with places like Rushton Lakes, Wicksteed, and the hospital and the schools. So there's a lot more information on our website on what people can do with that. So I hope that helps.
Brilliant. No, thank you. Thank you, Alison. And again, I think anyone that does want that support or assistance, then certainly look at the Brightwayz website, and there'll be lots of ideas, but also contact details there as well. So that's the sort of end of the Q&A session. So I'd just like to say we have had some questions specifically aimed at Northamptonshire Council. So as we mentioned in the first session, what we will do is we will respond to those. We'll put answers to those questions on the website, on our Climate Pages website, just to reassure those that have submitted questions for Northamptonshire Council. However, I'll close proceedings now and hand back to Councillor Pentland.
Thank you, George, and thank you to everybody there for submitting their questions, and to those, to Alison, Cecil, Matthew and Lucy for answering those. In the first session of our climate conference, the speakers were asked what individuals could do, the simple things they could get involved with doing to help with climate change and looking after the environment. And I think this session has really brought to the fore how people can get involved, whether that's with looking at how they're travelling around their locality, to broader things such as getting involved with volunteering with regard to the Greenway and litter picking, etc. So that was really good to be able to dive into that in a bit more detail. And we had some really thought-provoking questions. Alison spoke about engaging with the concerns that people raise. And I think that was reflected in the questions that we had. And it's important that people are able to have the information about these technologies that are emerging and how we can use those to everybody's benefit as well. So thank you everybody for engaging with this second session, and special thanks to our speakers for giving their time today. I hope that a number of you will be able to join us at 2 o'clock for the third and final session, which will be looking at celebrating and nurturing our environment. So I hope to see you all then.